to this interview with Dr. Amrita Sen Mukherjee. We're so lucky to have her on board. We're going to talk about so many cool things that people don't often talk about when it comes to GP training, stress, burnout, challenges, success stories, how to get through difficult times. We've got it all on this. So I think you're going to find it of some value. Amrita is an amazing GP. I met her, we were just talking about this off air, about 4.5, 5 years ago, I think, wasn't it, Amrita? I've kind of followed each other's journey since then, and she's doing some amazing things right now. She's the founder of Your Wellbeing Doctor. I'm sure you've seen this across social media right now. She's doing some really good stuff with her new company. She's done some great things before. First 5 wellbeing lead for the RCGP. She's worked with Next Gen London. She's also set up some voluntary schemes for wellbeing in a local hospital. So there's so many things that we're going to be drawing on in this interview. But firstly, thank you so much, Amrita, for coming on board, and I think it's going to be great.
Thank you for having me here. I mean, it's so nice to see you again after so many years, and to watch you as well and watch your organisation develop. I feel very privileged to be here, so I think the honour's all mine.
Thank you, and thank you so much. I think people are going to learn a lot of this. And yeah, it was 4.5 years ago when you were in ST3, I think we met doing CSA courses and things like that. And it's amazing to see how time flies, because 4.5 years ago seems not very long ago from when I met you. But tell me a bit about what you've been doing since you came out of GP training, where you are right now, and then we'll look a little bit about the challenges that you had in training itself.
Sure. So it's interesting that we met 4.5 years ago, because that's not actually when I completed my training. I sat my CSA quite early, actually, and then I took a period of maternity leave, came back to work, and I actually CCT'd in November 2018. So it hasn't actually been that long since I qualified. So I would say since that time, I've had a baby, been on maternity leave, and I have really took a good look at myself and thought, which direction do I want my future to go in? What do I want to do with my life? How do I want to provide for my children? And what aspirations do I have? And I think actually when we are training, when we're on that kind of treadmill, going through the motions and going through the exam process, and for me specifically, it was a long process because I trained less than full time. I had a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do. And that really allowed me to think, I need to diversify a bit. I need to think about where my strengths lie and what my strengths are and how I can really utilize them. And that's why I got into this field of wellbeing and looking at how I can support people, not just as a GP, not just as a clinician, but in other ways as well. And so that's really how I developed this kind of portfolio role and how I developed these other identities.
Yeah, it's amazing to see everything that you're cramming in at the moment, including clinical work, because it's not easy. And the portfolio GP term is banded around so much these days. It's almost the in thing. And, you know, if someone is just a GP, well, what else are you doing? But it sounds like you're managed to cope with so many different things. And often with portfolio general practice, people take too many things on and they really struggle. But it sounds like your balance is just right for you. But the well-being thing then, because that's obviously a big term that's going around at the moment, very, very popular term at the moment. Where did that come from yourself, and how are you putting your own spin on it? Because it's so commonly used at the moment.
That's a really good question. Thanks, Aman. I think I might have to take it back a bit though, if that's okay. So I think there's a common misnomer that actually there's no science behind wellbeing, and what I'd like to challenge is it's actually a fantastically rich field, and there's vast amounts of research and science in the whole context of it. And there are different ways of looking at well-being. We can look at the emotional context, the psychological, the physical, the mental health, and also the spiritual context. And it depends on who we are, where we're coming from, what our identity is, what our cultural values are, what kind of systems we work in, play in, live in. And so really that makes up the makeup of our well-being and who we are. And then if we look at that, we can actually see how much of that influences us in the decisions that we make. And then I kind of thought, well, actually, where does this come from for me, and why am I interested in this? And I suppose it comes from the fact that my father passed away when I was in my early 20s, and he was a very, very spiritual person, but he always had such fun in life. I never saw him upset. I never saw him you know, taking anything seriously. He had some quite significant challenges. He was a first generation immigrant. He was a GP, a single-handed practitioner, you know, quite significant challenges. However, I never saw him without a smile on his face. And it really made me reflect on how he was like that. What was it that anchored him? What were his strengths and why was he like that? And I started to look at religious texts, I started to look at a lot of things, and I started to marry the neuroscience behind that. I started to marry the spirituality behind that, and I started to become really intrigued. And that was what took me on my journey of starting the masters that I'm doing, because there's so many of these Eastern concepts and Western concepts that have been amalgamated that I thought, oh, there's something going on here and I need to learn more. And that's what's taken me on my journey of well-being. And so I suppose for me, the interest has come from having an amazing positive role model, wanting to provide that same role model for my children, but also being a scientist through and through, wanting to have that background. And I suppose my niche and my spin on it is essentially wanting to have credibility, wanting to have authenticity, and having a thirst for knowledge. I'm a student of life, I'm a student of science, and I just want to learn more. So I suppose that's where my own interest and my own spin and niche comes from.
Wow. So you've thought about this a lot. It's not just like, oh, well, I like the idea of well-being. Let's do a few workshops, and because it's the in thing. Like, you really have looked into this, studied it, gone through it, with a fine-tooth comb. And it sounds like your passion for it is growing day by day.
It is, and I think the more I learn, the more I realise I have to learn. And like with anything, when you're studying the clinical skills and general practice, you might learn about dermatomyositis or something, but that's a whole spectrum of connective tissue disease. And then the more connective tissue diseases you learn, the more there are, that kind of thing. The more I learn about well-being, the more I realise I don't know. And the more I realise I don't know, the more I need to know. So it's this cycle of life that we're on. But the fundamental thing for me is that this gives me pure joy. This gives me a real ignition for life. And the more I learn about it, the more I want to share with people. And so that really is the fuel that's firing me at the moment.
That's amazing. And you do a lot of work with a whole range of healthcare professionals, don't you? And obviously we focus a lot on a core spectrum of people. GP trainees is one of our biggest or some of our biggest audiences, and I suppose a lot of people who are watching will be GP trainees right now, but also junior doctors in general from across the globe. So let's think about GP training then. Like, what do you remember about your GP training years? Was it an enjoyable time? You said it was quite a long time compared to the normal 3 years, but tell me what your experiences were of GP training itself, and how did that link in with well-being and what you're doing right now?
Sure. Okay. So my GP training took 6.5 years, just under 6.5 years. And that was because I had 2 children during my training. And I trained less than full time. So that's why it took so long. And I would say the main difficulty I had owing to that was the loss of companionship through that time. Because every time I came back from maternity leave, or like with other trainees, every time they come back from a period of, I don't know, fellowship or absence from their cohort, you lose integration with your cohort. And although I remained friends with the original cohort that I started with, and although I gained new friendships, that same link and bond and camaraderie didn't seem to exist.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the reasons for that were, if that was because I was a mother and maybe a few people in the cohort weren't mothers, and so I had other responsibilities. I couldn't go for a drink after work, I couldn't necessarily meet before work for a coffee because I had other things to do. And so that can leave people, or me in particular at that time, a little bit maybe left to the side. And so that's why I think training for me was a little bit harder, because when it came to things like AKT, CSA, I was much more independent in my processes, whereas I think with GP trainees who are going through the whole scheme as a run through, they might have a bit more camaraderie. So I'd say that to me was probably the main difficulty that I found, but it was a significant difficulty, I have to say. Looking back, I just got on with it, but at this point in time I realized that it did bother me, actually.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, actually, because you're right, most GP trainees are going to follow the same pattern as everybody else. You start at the same time, you finish at the same time, and you almost do everything together, all the steps together. You revise AKT semi together by testing each other, whatever it might be, doing questions and setting yourself targets and goals. And then CSA obviously gets in your groups and practice, and yeah, to miss out on that bit and have to try and redevelop new cohorts every time must be quite difficult. And I do hear this from people who are less than full time and who take time out and come back in. So I can see that playing out completely. But you obviously see a lot of trainees now and junior doctors. What kind of challenges have you heard or you come across that you've helped trainees with and are doing so right now?
Sure. So I think the main thing that I'm seeing is, so pre-COVID, the problems were very different to this situation that we've been in over the last kind of 8 months. But pre-COVID, there was a lot of concern around identity, a lot of concern around motivation, not being valued, and having lost this sense of essentially camaraderie, just being a number and going through the motions. I think there's a whole system-wide problem that contributes to that, whether it be the loss of messes, the loss of having a firm, the loss of having an educational supervisor who might be more intricately involved in your pastoral care as well as clinical care, clinical stewardship, sorry, should I say. I think there are so many different factors, it's multifaceted, but that previously was an issue. But fundamentally, what the crux of that is, what the theme that pulls all of these things together is the loss of humanity, the loss of seeing people as individuals. And I think that generally is a problem in medicine. We get on the treadmill, we get a training number, and then we go through the motions, and we're producing sausages in a sausage factory. We're not allowing for that individual creativity, that growth mindset, that difference in skill set. We're not promoting that because actually we are so different, we are so unique, and that's why we all come into medicine. We do different specialties because we are individuals. I think what happens is sometimes when we go into training, sometimes because it's such a busy profession, because there are so many stresses and strains, and because we have to work very hard, sometimes those things that set us out as individuals get put to the side. And I think that was the main issue.
And how can you advise somebody, how can they deal with that? Like if they've got that feeling of, I'm just on the treadmill, on the rat race, I'm doing what I have to do, I don't really feel this is what I want to do, but I have to do it to get through steps X, Y, Z, whether it be exams or assessments or whatever it might be. How do you advise them? What do you say to them?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Aman. So I would say that it's really important to, first of all, recognize what's happening to you, recognize that you might be having some, thoughts that might be representative of the fact that you might not be getting what you want. And I'm not saying that we have to get what we want all the time in life. Life isn't like that. There are always pluses and minuses. But if there's something fundamentally that you feel that is lacking, it's important to recognize it and maybe not park it all the time, but acknowledge it. And you might not be able to get it now, but there might be a way of weaving it into your life at some point in the future. But acknowledging is the first point. Sorry, recognizing is the first point. Then two, acknowledging it and realizing when we can move on to bringing that into our lives. So actually having that dialogue with yourself and having that time for self-reflection. We're all very good at professional reflection, especially as GPs, but I don't know if we're very good at self-reflection and giving ourselves that headspace to actually slow our mind down to see the woods for the trees. And what I mean by that is actually being able to think, what are my values? What's my identity? What do I want from life? And how can I achieve that? Because quite often when we're doing things in a fast-paced manner, we don't actually get to have that clarity of thought. And then thinking a third step is, how can I manage that? Okay, so I've done the recognition, I've done the acknowledgement. How can I manage it? What actual strategies can I use to build that into my life? Now that might be talking to somebody. That might be reaching out for actual external support. It might be a friend, it might be a colleague, a mentor, or it might be professional help. And there's no shame in that at all. If we need professional help, we should always seek it. As we advise our patients, we should support ourselves. The second thing might be more connection with people. Now, this is the problem at the present moment with the current situation we're living in. We might have spent time with friends, gone to people's houses, socialized in ways that were just normal to us. But because of the current situation, the things that were normal to us have been taken away. And so the comfort that we got, the support that we received is no longer available to us. Yeah. We're making the best of situations, but it's not hitting the spot, it's not doing what we need it to do. So even acknowledging that, trying to connect with people, whether it be over Zoom, whether it be on a phone call, whether it be FaceTime, but acknowledging that I really love seeing you, I really love talking to you, but I'm not getting what I need. And just having that conversation so that other person is also given permission to say, I know, I really miss you too. Or, you know, something along those lines. Connection is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing. A connection is the root of most problems being solved, isn't it? And connecting with people, talking to people. And medics know this. They know that I really should be talking to somebody right now. But you know, so many times you see someone who left it and left it and left it and left it. And I just find it hard to almost admit that I'm struggling.
Yeah.
So if there's a trainee or a junior doctor, you know, watching this right now who is struggling, who's not spoken to anybody else, who doesn't want to go to their supervisor, who doesn't want to go to their TPD, they feel it's a bit too close, but they don't want to go professionally just yet. They don't feel they're quite there. What advice do you have for them? How can you break that feeling of I need to keep it to myself? Because one thing to know I should do it, but then to actually do it is a different story sometimes. What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Aman. What I would suggest to them is asking themselves that same question. So how would they feel if a loved one said to them, whether it be their brother, their sister, their husband, wife, friend, whoever it is, mother, what would they say to their loved one if that loved one had said, I didn't feel I could talk to you?
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is talking to yourself with love. Learning how to speak to yourself with compassion and practicing the art of self-compassion is really, really important. And it's not I'm saying it like it's a really easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think when we're giving so much of ourselves to our patients, to our colleagues, and we're practicing in this very caring role, when we give so much of ourselves to others, we don't give to ourselves. And that's why wellbeing is so important, because we have to learn the art of giving to ourselves and to others in a balance. But that's why I say, actually, if we learn the art of talking to ourselves with love, learn the art of talking to ourselves like we would our mother, brother, sister, husband, whoever it is that you love, then that might give you the permission to reach out to somebody else.
That's a really good idea. Talking to yourself first to make it easier to externalize it. And we talk about this concept quite a lot, about having a go-to and a pre-planned go-to. So often, I suppose, when I see GP trainees stressed because of exam failure or whatever might be happening in their careers, they're in that situation of difficulty right now. And it's very difficult at that point for them to think logically who's the best person to go and speak to. So we talk about almost reverse engineering this and thinking, when you're in a good spot, plan for when I'm in a bad spot, this is where I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to do. This is going to be my action plan. So you've almost thought it through at a time where your brain is thinking clearly and not having to work that out when you're super, super, super stressed. And we talk about this a lot with ST1s, that you're going to have difficult time in the next few years. There's going to be a period of time which is very difficult for you for whatever reason, life, training, exam, whatever. But pre-plan your go-tos. Don't try and work that out at that point of significant stress. But then where do people have the time to sit there and think about all this stuff? Because, as you know, GP training is crazy and there's so many things to do and tick boxes and everything. And that's where the balance, I guess, comes, isn't it?
Yeah, but Aman, that's amazing advice that you're giving, because actually that's based on pure psychological theories of coping strategies and resilience strategies. Because actually, if we become, you know, very practiced in developing who our go-to person is, if we become practiced in knowing how we can support ourselves, how we can, inverted commas, self-soothe, like we teach babies to self-soothe, then actually we're ahead of the game. Because when it comes to our difficult times, when it comes to those times of uncertainty, because they will arise, because life is like that, we're part way along to being able to support ourselves, because we have those strategies up our sleeve, so that when we need to, we know what we can use.
Yeah.
And that's why I was talking about the connection, because actually we can't do it in the way that we used to, but being able to do it in a modified way might give some support. Other people like validation from others, where someone says, actually, you know, I really love you, or, you know, you're a great friend to me. If you need that, ask a trusted person to give that to you. If you're somebody who doesn't need that, but they need professional morale boosting, ask your supervisor to give it to you. And the discord comes, the incongruency comes, or the internal conflict comes when we don't get the support that we need. and that's called optimal support matching. So essentially, I might say to you, I'm having a bad day, and you might say, okay, I'll make you a cup of tea, but actually I don't like tea, I like coffee. So it's no help to me, because you're trying to be really kind to me, you're trying to help me, but what you're providing for me isn't supportive in the way that I need you to be supportive.
Yeah.
So it's about me communicating to you clearly what I need, and then you providing that for me. So it's about being clear about what you need as well.
Yeah. And sometimes maybe that's why it's useful to go and talk to somebody that you don't have that connection with, because there's no expectations. They don't know what they think you want, and they see it from a completely blank canvas, which is, I guess, why going to TPDs or area deans or professionals or whoever it might be that don't know you sometimes seems easier than going to somebody that you do know, because maybe you've got those expectations and they're not met as you want them to be. It probably makes it harder, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But also there's emotions involved. You know, we don't live in isolation. So if you have a friendship or a relationship with somebody, there's a lot of baggage, but not in a negative sense, in a, you know, that there's a lot of history, should I say, sorry, not baggage.
Yeah.
So there are other influences that play in that relationship, there are other responsibilities that play in that relationship, and also, so that's what makes it hard as well. And sometimes we can't expose our own vulnerabilities with somebody who we're very close to. So
yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Or somebody that you fear, like, for example, you don't want to go and talk to your supervisor or your trainer because you fear that you may be seen in a certain way, and this may impact things like ESRs and, you know, assessments, etc. So that's another level of, there's a fence in the way of sometimes going to see somebody because you're worried about the implications, I guess.
Absolutely. And that's a very tricky part of training. When you're training, it's very, very difficult to understand who you can talk to, how can I reach out for help. And I think that's why that camaraderie amongst your peers is really important. But equally, there are professional support agencies out there if anyone gets to that point where they need to. And I think it's really important for us all to be breaking down that stigma, breaking down those barriers of shame and of guilt, and just normalizing it, that well-being is an important part of our own well-being. You know, when we look at the neuroscience, we see how important that is, and we understand the importance of it, and why positive and negative emotions go hand in hand, and there has to be a balance. And so kind of understanding and accepting that is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, these are the kind of queries that I get regularly, and I, you know, try and help as much as you can. But it's hard to give a one advice fits all, isn't it? And it's got to be tailored, and that's, I think, where the challenge comes, because people think they know what the best thing is for somebody, but obviously for that person it might be completely different. But one of the common examples I get contacted for is failure. So let's talk a little bit about failure, particularly in exams, because, you know, exams are unfortunately a part of what we do in training, and unfortunately not everybody can pass an exam. So there are going to be people who fail an exam. So what would be your advice, short term, medium term, long term, for someone who's just failed an exam and they say that they've got the result an hour ago or a day ago? What kind of things would you think about in terms of strategizing if they came to you for advice?
Sure. So that's one that I'm just going to have to think about for a moment. I think it's really important to understand the background from which somebody's coming from, and why it is this has elicited such a strong reaction, if you see what I mean. What is it about this exam, or this not passing the exam, that has caused them to have such a strong visceral, physical, and also emotional reaction? Is it that this is a cumulative effect? Is it that there was so much riding on it? Is it a financial effect? You know, what is it? What's the crux of the issue?
Yeah.
And I think finding out what the crux of it is, so kind of almost funneling down and figuring out what that issue is really important, because then you can actually talk about managing that issue. And it comes down to what I was talking about before, about kind of recognizing, acknowledging, and then managing, because then you can build up strategies for the short, medium, and long term. Because actually, sometimes when you're in a situation and you've been working so hard for something like an AKT, like a CSA, your whole life becomes about that. Understandably so. It's a really important milestone in your training, a step further along to you achieving a lifelong ambition. So there's a lot riding on it, absolutely. And in no way am I minimizing the importance of these events. However, it is important as well to gain a bit of perspective about it and to understand that there are other important elements in life too. Health is important, friendships are important, family is important, and the other skills that we have. And passing an exam is one skill. And I think what I would do in that moment is I would really encourage and really support that person in celebrating their strengths and thinking about times when they have been successful, thinking about times when they have come through difficult times, and figuring out maybe things that were unique about them that other people didn't have, and allowing them to really rise from the situation in a sense that would allow them to not minimize the pain and the despair that they were feeling, but allow them to see it from a different perspective. So I'd want to offer them hope, and I'd want to offer them opportunity, and I'd want to offer them the understanding that they can grow from the process.
Yeah, that's really useful, and that actually mirrors a lot that what I suggest to somebody as well, because people talk a lot about perspective, and they say, well, put it in perspective, it's just an exam, it's just a small part of it. But that term is bandied around a lot, but people don't often explain, what do you mean by put it in perspective? It's just like, well, you just need to figure out how to do it. It's just what you need to do, but how? So we talk a lot about longitudinal perspective and horizontal perspective. So longitudinal, we talk about, look, if you're here, look forward at what's coming and all the good things that are coming, and look back at all the good things that you've done. So in the grand scheme of things, in the long journey, this is a small blip. But then also horizontal perspective as well. So look either side of you. You've got the family, you've got the good holiday coming up, you've got the other pro things that are going on in your life. So you're looking at it horizontally and longitudinally. When you look together, you realize actually perspective is quite powerful, because both forward and back and left and right, it's just a dot. And sometimes people just say, well, just put it in perspective, it's not a big deal. But sometimes taking that time to explain what do you mean by perspective can really help. Just like you mentioned, I think that can really help people put it into context. Whereas just the words, put it in perspective, often is bandied around by a lot of people, but it doesn't really help because it doesn't really add to any value.
No, absolutely, because what you're doing is you're just telling somebody what the problem is, but not offering them a solution. And what people really need when they're in a time of difficulty is a solution, because they don't have that headspace. They're in a state of overwhelm, they're in a state of anxiety. And when you're like that, you can't think of the solutions yourself. You need somebody to hold your hand and take you through it. And that doesn't mean to say that they're going to do it for you, but they're at least offering you guidance. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important to offer trainees support, because one thing that trainees have done over the last 8 months is really, really hold our services together. They really held the NHS together. They have faced significant issues with redeployment. They haven't questioned that at all. They don't have the choice. It's not even that they haven't, they don't have the choice to question that. They have to do, because it's part of their contract. You know, they've had changes to their learning environments, they've had changes to their education environments, they've had changes to their personal environments. They've also had to have their examination, you know, protocols changed as well. The amount of change that's had to happen to them that they've just had to swallow has been immense. And I think it's really important to just celebrate that and just, you know, pay tribute to that resilience that's been in the trainee workforce.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen obviously firsthand with the exams, you know, exams are postponed, cancelled, are they coming, are they not, new formats. It's been crazy to see how trainers have picked up and just got on with it and you know, done preparation over the summer, even though that's not normally what you think about doing. No. Those things have been really amazing. And yeah, trainees should be celebrated, as you said. So they're doing amazing things, and often without comeback. Like they don't have streams to come back and talk about these things in detail. They just have to deal with it and kind of think, well, you know, the standard thing is, well, it's only a few years, let's just get it through, and then you can do what you like. When you're a GP, you can do what you like, then you can have your choices. But in training, sometimes they're feeling this whole, I've just got to do what I'm told and get through to the other end without upsetting things and causing problems. But what do you do when you have that problem as a trainee? Say, for example, you're in a situation, in a rotation, and you don't feel you're gelling with supervisors, CSs, whoever it might be, ESs, or a place that you're working, a ward or a practice. What's your advice for dealing with that? Because certainly what most trainers will do is just say, well, let's just try and deal with it for 4 months and then I can forget about it. But that can lead to a lot of issues itself and problems itself, right? But so how would you deal with that situation? What advice would you give if someone's really struggling in a rotation or a job or with a supervisor and they just don't know where to go?
Yeah, that's interesting, Aman. I think I would support the trainee in gaining confidence. I think having real social support at that time is important, and not just somebody who is a friend, but somebody who is a colleague who could really understand the situation. Because I think there's a difference between non-medic colleagues and medic colleagues. As much as medic colleagues love to empathise and are lovely and want to help us, I think when it comes to these kind of specific issues that you're talking about with regards to the hierarchy and with regards to the infantilization maybe of trainees and with regards to maybe pursuing all avenues and not being able to go anywhere, it might be supportive to have somebody who actually understands that, because sometimes what non-medics might say is, oh, what about this option, what about that option? And then what happens to the person in the middle is they get even more frustrated, because they say, well, that isn't an option. If you knew the process, you would understand, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, you don't know what it's like to be a medic, or you don't know all that kind of stuff. It's the you versus us mentality, which is hard to fight sometimes.
Absolutely. I think journaling is a really, really important way of getting emotions down. It's a really constructive way of getting emotions out. And if there were really difficult situations, it's really great to have, a way of being able to channel that. And being able to talk to people about that. And then again, if you need to get professional help, getting professional help, which is confidential, because if you have explored all the avenues and you're not able to get any support in any of those domains, then actually, we have to look at other external options. And as you said, GP training is for a finite amount of time. There are things at the other end, and I think it's about hopefully gaining some support to look at the longitudinal view, as you said, and the horizontal view, so we can kind of transfer and extrapolate those strategies that we used for exam failure, should that be an unfortunate situation that someone was faced with this type of situation. And I think that goes with any kind of difficult situation. I think when we're talking about stress and we're talking about difficult situations, we ourselves have to understand what our own coping strategies are. Some of us work in ways where we have what we call emotional focused strategies. Some of us have avoidance coping strategies. Some of us have approach focused strategies. So depending on what your own strategies are, you need to have good, robust mechanisms in which you can deal with these. And it kind of, again, goes back to what you were talking about. Really, really understand what they are in your good times. So when it comes to your bad times, you're just naturally reliant on them without having to think about them. And that's, the real beauty of having this camaraderie, of having this connection, and of actually being able to work on your well-being as well at the same time, simultaneously, in your good times. So then it picks you up in your bad times when you are feeling low. And
that's the challenge, isn't it? Because let's be honest, who's going to think about bad times when things are good? Because you just don't, we think we're invincible, and we never have a bad time in our lives. So it's really hard to have that much perspective to think about it now, when you're kind of thinking, well, why would it ever happen? And am I almost jinxing it to happening, given that I'm thinking about what if it happens when it happens? And all these things just go through your mind, and it's really tough. But what about, say, someone is starting to feel that I'm reaching that, okay, I think I might be reaching this burnout phase. I've heard a lot about burnout talk. There's a lot of, everything's about burnout these days. I think I might be reaching that. What would you suggest at that point? So they haven't quite got to that bit yet, but they're getting the thought that, am I, could this possibly be happening?
Well, I think if you're having that thought, really, we have to have some professional help at that point, because I think there is a certain point up to which we can use mechanisms ourselves. We can use, things like mindfulness. We can use resilience coping strategies. We can, use yoga. And the reason I mention all these things is because there's a lot of evidence behind them. I'm not just mentioning things that are on trend at the moment, or you develop your own coping mechanisms, such as, people love to play music because they get into flow. So flow is something that actually develops really important aspects of well-being as well. But if you're at that point where actually you're feeling that I'm not in a good place, I think I'm burning out, I'm not getting enjoyment, I am having, blunted feelings, I'm getting compassion fatigue, then we're in that point where actually people need to seek professional guidance. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with taking some time out from work, being able to have that time to restore your own self, because otherwise we're facing a situation where we are with any other health problem, they are physical or mental health problem, where we could be potentially harming ourselves, as well as being in a position where we might not be doing the best for others as well. So my advice would be, if anyone does feel that they're in that situation, really to seek professional guidance.
And let's pick that up a little, professional guidance, because again, people say that a lot: get professional expertise, get professional guidance. As a GP trainee, SD1, SD2, SD3, if you feel you can't go to your supervisor trainers, or you have already but still feel you need some more support, have you got any good examples of where they should be going? Which organizations, or who should they start with? Where should they go?
Yeah, so in the first instance, people can always attend their own individual GP, their own primary care practitioner. One's own primary care practitioner should be well equipped to deal with these types of difficulties. And if one feels that they can't approach their own primary care practitioner, then there are services such as PHP, which is the Practitioner Health Programme, and that's now a national programme which has been rolled out throughout the country. So I would say accessing those types of programmes, or accessing other types of support services such as wellbeing services, if they're people who you have understood, have proper credentials, and have an understanding of particular aspects of mental health and well-being, and can help you in the way that you need.
But a fundamental point is, don't keep it to yourself. Go somewhere, talk to somebody, get the ball rolling, get the first step ahead of you, and then hopefully things will start to get easier.
Absolutely.
I think that's really fascinating, and hopefully, if this has resonated with somebody who's going through these types of things, hopefully this kind of advice is going to help, because sometimes you just need to hear it and almost be given the permission to accept it, and then look to what can I do, rather than kind of close the door and just hope that it'll get better. But tell me about what you're doing now then. So we mentioned wellbeing a lot, and obviously you found your wellbeing doctor. So tell me about that. What's its aims? Where's it going? What's the vision behind it?
Sure. Okay. So that's I set the aim was not to set it up actually now. The aim was to set it up when I completed my master's, which is going to happen, fingers crossed, in the summer of 2021. So I'm studying a master's in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, and I'm about to embark on some research in a really interesting area called post-traumatic growth, which is essentially a really interesting area that I think is going to hopefully be a springboard for some exciting work in the future. So I wanted to set up my company in alignment with completing my master's, but when COVID struck, I realised that I had a skill set that I wanted to use imminently to support others. So I set up my organisation, and I put out my services on a voluntary basis to support colleagues from my local hospital, but I also set up my business as well to support others too, because I'm a locum GP, and as everybody knows, in the climate of COVID, unfortunately, the locum work dried up, and so I had to find a means of supporting myself as well, and my own family. So
what are you doing?
That was why I set my...
What's happening with your organisation? What kind of things are you doing?
Yeah, so I provide coaching. I provide group coaching and individual coaching. I provide workshops and resilience training and wellbeing skills, essentially. So providing people with the skills to understand what wellbeing is from a scientific perspective, understand the neuroscience behind it, and also understanding how they can empower themselves to take hold of their own life journey, and to understand how they can thrive, flourish, and grow in a way that's engaged with their own life purpose and meaning. So that's essentially what my purpose is and how I want my organisation to grow.
And you're working with other organisations, aren't you? So first by Wellbeing Lead for the College, RCGP. Tell me a bit about that. What's going on with that? How's that going?
Yeah, so it's going really well. So I do so that's a volunteer role. So I volunteer for the college, and I've been with the college for quite a long time actually as an AIT representative. So I've been with them since I was a trainee, and then I was a first 5 representative for my local area. But then I moved from that role to being the wellbeing lead. So I've given up my locality area role. So I'm trying to support wellbeing in the first 5 community as best as I can. I think COVID has been very, very difficult for the first 5 community as well. So we're trying to put on some resources and put some support systems out there so that our community feels, like we're caring for them and as if they're supported in a holistic manner, not just in, the clinical sense. And I also support the Next Generation GP London programme too. Yeah. So yes, it keeps me quite busy and on my toes.
You're doing some really good things, but bringing your ethos and your values into these settings, which is great because the more people that can pick up these skills and learn how to not just deal with these issues, but understand them, recognise them, etc., and start the ball rolling, like we said, is really, really good. And what's in the future? What else is coming up with Amrita? What else can we see in the next 6 months, a year?
So I really have to concentrate on my masters, to be honest. So I think I'm going to continue with the way I'm going. I'm going to concentrate on my masters, and then I'm going to say, watch this space, and let's see.
It's amazing what you've done in the last couple of years, and very different to 4.5 years ago when we were sitting doing role plays for an exam. That's
I know.
You are sitting there testing you and pushing you to your limits with challenging scenarios. And what you
I still remember that day. I was late as well, wasn't I?
I don't remember that. I don't remember that. But it seems such a long time ago, and you have done amazing things since you said only 2018, isn't it? You came out of training.
Yeah.
So it's been a roller coaster couple of years. You've done some really, really good things, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the future. Where can people find you? What are your handles? What are your links?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so Dr. Amrita Sen Mukherjee. You can find me on Twitter as @YourWellbeingDoctor, that's DR. You can find me on Instagram, I'm @YourWellbeingDoctor, but that's spelt doctor, DOCTOR. You can find me on Facebook as well. My handle is @YourWellbeingDoctor, and my website is www.yourwellbeing.doctor.
Amazing. And we'll put all these links up on, and they'll be on the link down below for anybody who's watching. And if anybody is watching and they think, okay, I think this has been amazing, but I want a bit of extra advice, can they just contact you? Can they send you a message? Can they get in touch?
Yes, absolutely. I'm more than happy for people to contact me. I might be a bit slow at getting back to people at the moment, but I will endeavour to get back to everybody. I do answer all my messages personally.
Amazing. Thank you. I think that's been really helpful. And I think if trainees or junior doctors in general are watching this, hopefully you've got some value from it. If some of the things we talked about resonate with you, please do get the advice that you deserve. But I hope it's going to set you off in the right direction. Amrita, thank you so much. It's been really eye-opening. Hopefully we can do some more of these going forward, particularly if I get some particular questions or some challenging situations that I think you might be amazing. And if you're happy, we can do a few more of these going ahead in the future.
Absolutely. It'll be my absolute pleasure, Aman. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Amrita.
Take care.
Bye.